A mysterious warrior in a black cloak and iron mask hunts a terrified young woman named Emery through a ruined cityscape. Her eyes wide with fear, she limps through crumbling alleys, pursued by the slow, silent figure whose red eyes never blink. Just as he's about to reach her, Darren, ex-construction worker, steps in to help. But saving Emery pulls him into a nightmare, an underground chase, a whispered legend, a relic, a betrayal, a mirror that reflects something twisted. Every second brings a turn. Every shadow hides more than just darkness. What is real? Who can be trusted? And what happened to Emery in the end? 3. True Terror Street Ories. It was late September in Shreveport, Louisiana. The kind of night where the air sat heavy and nothing felt quite right. That was when we first saw him standing by the tarot reader's porch, motionless, smiling behind a mask. Camille was 23, a local pageant girl turned receptionist, short dark hair, striking green eyes. She had no business being part of what came next, but she wanted answers. That's why she knocked on the door of Maudie's tarot room. I was with her Derek, and so was Lena, our friend since college. Maudie read the cards, but none of us expected the fourth person already inside. A man in a dark coat, seated in the corner, face covered in a pale mask, eyes just holes. When the lights flickered, he laughed. A dry, deliberate sound. Camille asked what he wanted. He didn't reply. He just pointed at the cards on the table. Temperance sat at the center. We left after that, but he kept showing up. At Camille's work, outside Lena's apartment, on the train, across from me. Never saying anything, just watching. When Camille got a note slipped into her mailbox, it was just one sentence: come back and finish the reading. She wanted to ignore it. We all did. But that night, she didn't answer her phone. Her place was locked from the outside. Her shoes were still by the door. Inside, the table was reset, same as before. Candles lit. Cards laid out. No one there, but a faint smell of jasmine and mold. Then the mirror cracked on its own. We found her 2 days later, in a park 20 miles away. No memory. Her eyes wouldn't close when she blinked. She kept repeating one thing: he's not a man. He's the reason the cards shake. Now we stay together. We travel town to town, helping Maudie break the pattern. Because that thing, whatever it is, he follows the cards. And he always shows up for the 14th draw. In the final scene, he stands at the edge of the woods, mask tilted, coat brushing against the grass. His laugh returns softer now, almost like it's coming from inside you. Camille steps toward him once, like drawn by a string, then stops. He turns and vanishes, a step, but the cards remain on the ground. All 13 face up, one still flipped, and we know what's coming next. A mirror that reflects something twisted. Every second brings a turn. The warehouse was colder than I remembered. Broken glass crunched under my boots as I moved carefully behind Emery. Her breath was shaky, like she hadn't stopped running since we escaped the figure in the mask. She wouldn't look at me, only clutched the old leather satchel tighter. I caught a glimpse of her wrist. There was a faint glowing mark, like a burn, but it pulsed softly, as if alive. She pulled her sleeve down fast. I didn't ask. I knew better. But the more we walked, the more I felt like something was behind us. Emery whispered that the masked one wasn't following us. He was leading us. That made my skin crawl. We were stepping into something old. something waiting. Theo joined us at the north gate. His voice was calm, but his eyes darted at every sound. He'd worked as a night guard at a lab near the dead zone. Said he'd seen lights moving underground, patterns in the static on cameras, whispers when no one else was there. He swore Emery had something they wanted, and they would keep sending him until she gave it up. We reached the center of the city ruins just before dark. That's when the fog came too fast, too thick. I could barely see Emery's silhouette a few feet ahead, but then her outline shifted, taller, shoulders sharper. I blinked hard. It was him. The cloak hung still. His eyes were red again, not glowing, just watching. I froze, but Emery moved, reaching behind her back. Not for a weapon, but a mirror. Old, cracked, gold trimmed like something from a forgotten age. She held it up to him, and the light changed. Suddenly, we weren't in the city anymore. We were standing in a hallway, walls of shifting stone, floor like liquid glass. I turned, but Theo was gone. Just silence, just me and her, and him still watching. Emery whispered something I couldn't catch. She looked older, tired. She said the mirror had shown her things. She said none of this started the way we thought. A woman stepped out from the wall, pale skin, silver dress. Her name was Mireille. She didn't speak, just touched Emery's cheek, then turned to me. I couldn't move. My heartbeat sounded like footsteps, not mine. She said we had one chance left, one door, one path, but it meant letting go of the real world. I laughed, maybe to stay sane. Emery didn't hesitate. She walked to the edge of the hallway and placed the mirror down. It slid through the floor like water. The masked figure stepped forward. I didn't see him move. He was just there, in front of me, then behind, then gone, like a memory you try to hold on to, but it slips through your hands. Mireille said he had once been human, that the more you look into the mirror, the less human you stay. Emery took my hand. Her skin was warm, her voice steady. She told me the city wasn't ruins, it was memory, and I wasn't running from him, I was running from the truth. The hallway cracked, light poured through, and just like that, I was back in the warehouse, alone. The satchel was there, the mirror was gone, and etched into the floor, glowing faintly, were two letters, A.E. I still don't know what they mean, but I dream of red eyes almost every night. It's been 5 nights since the mirror vanished. I kept the satchel close, though I still didn't know why. I couldn't sleep. The hum beneath the floorboards wouldn't stop, like something breathing under the house. Emery hadn't returned. Theo left me a note, just a single line. Don't trust the quiet. I didn't know what that meant until tonight, because the house spoke, not in words, but in patterns. My bedroom light blinked twice, then the hallway lamp flickered, then silence. I followed the lights without thinking. My legs moved like they remembered something I didn't. I passed the front door. It was open. The fog had returned, thicker, silver gray like velvet. In the distance, I saw 2 figures, one tall and cloaked, the other smaller, kneeling. I recognized her by the tilt of her shoulders. Emery. She wasn't moving, but her hair danced in the fog, like it was caught in wind I couldn't feel. I stepped forward, and the ground cracked. Not broke cracked, like glass under heat. The world rippled, and suddenly I was in a room I didn't know, yet everything felt familiar. Walls lined with shelves, filled with mirrors. Hundreds, maybe more, each one facing another. I saw myself from every angle. Some reflections blinked a moment too late. Some didn't move at all. A voice called my name, soft, male, not Theo, not anyone I knew. He stepped from behind one of the mirrors, tall, sharp features. His coat looked like it belonged in another era. His name was Avery. He said he'd been trying to reach me. He told me this place wasn't made to be found. It finds you when you carry pieces of it, like Emery. like the satchel. I opened it again for the first time in days. Inside, only one thing remained: a page torn from an old book. It showed a diagram of a door, not made of wood or stone, but of mirrors arranged in a perfect ring. Avery nodded, said the door had opened once. It was trying again. We found Emery at the center of the room. She wasn't unconscious, but her eyes were glassy. Her mouth moved without sound. I touched her hand, and she gasped awake. Her voice was hoarse. She asked about the sky. She thought we'd been gone years. Avery led us down a spiral staircase, hidden beneath one of the mirror walls. The air changed. He said this was where the masked figure was created, that he was born from reflection, too much of it. People kept looking for answers in the mirrors. At some point, the mirrors started looking back, and one of them became him. We stopped when we saw a door made entirely of light. Emery hesitated. She said her mark burned again. She lifted her sleeve. The symbol was brighter now, but next to it, another had appeared. Mine. I didn't know how or when. Avery told us the door doesn't let everyone leave. It chooses, and once you walk through, you leave something behind. I asked what. He didn't answer. Emery stepped forward. The door shimmered. The light pulled her in like a tide. She looked back once. Her lips moved. I think she said thank you. Then she vanished. I stood there, unable to follow. Avery turned to me, said my part wasn't finished. He handed me a mirror, small, circular. The reflection was dark at first. Then I saw myself, standing alone in the warehouse. Exactly where this all started. The mirror warmed in my hand, and on the back, etched in shallow lines, were the same two letters, A.E. This time, I understood. Not initials, not names. A cycle. And it had begun again. The mirror Avery gave me hasn't shown my reflection since that night. It sits on my desk, silent, but somehow louder than anything in this house. I haven't spoken to anyone in days, not since Emery vanished. The spiral staircase closed behind her, and nothing I did could bring it back. I tried calling Theo again, no answer. But last night, I found a note slipped under the front door. New handwriting. 3 words. Stay near water. I didn't sleep. My thoughts swirled like fog, clinging to the windows. This morning, I walked to the lake behind the house. I don't usually go that far, not since the fog first appeared. But today, the path was clear. It was too quiet. No birds, no wind. Even the trees stood still, like they were listening. Near the water's edge, I saw a woman standing ankle deep. She wore a pale dress, soaked from the hem. Her back was to me. I called out, but she didn't turn. When I reached her, she whispered one word, mirrored. She looked at me then. Her eyes shimmered, not with light, but with memory. Mine. Every detail. My childhood bedroom. My old cat. My broken ankle at age 10. Things I hadn't thought of in years. She didn't blink. I stepped back, heart pounding. She wasn't Emery. Her name was June. She said she'd lived in the mirror for 19 years, that the longer you stay, the more of yourself you lose. That Emery was on the other side now, that she needed me. I asked her how. She handed me a stone, smooth and warm, told me it was an anchor, that if I held it near the mirror during the hour, between night and morning, it might show me the seam. That's what she called it, the seam. That night, I waited. 4:12 a.m. exactly. The sky just beginning to shift. I placed a stone next to the mirror. For a moment, nothing. Then the glass turned black. Then red. Then I saw the warehouse again, but this time it was upside down. A voice echoed, not from the mirror, but inside the walls. Familiar, Emery, calling my name. I touched the surface, and it rippled, cold. Then I saw her face, pale, lips pressed tight. She wasn't alone. A man stood behind her, his face blurred, like water disturbed. I called out, but my voice didn't carry through. She raised her hand, and traced something on the glass. It looked like letters, but backward. I copied them onto paper. COVE. The mirror turned clear again. Just me. At dawn, I packed the stone, the mirror, and the paper. I drove toward the old coastal town where my grandmother used to live, the place she always called the Cove. The whole way, I felt watched. Not in a paranoid way, more like something guiding me. When I arrived, the town looked the same, but quieter. I found a bed and breakfast still open. The woman at the front desk stared at me a little too long. Asked if I was related to the girl in the story. I asked what story. She said a girl vanished near the cliffs years ago. Only thing found was a mirror, half buried in the sand. Locals say her name was Emery, that she left a message in the rocks, but no one ever figured it out. I didn't respond, just nodded. That night, I walked the cliffs. The tide was low. I found the rocks. And there, half hidden in the moss, carved into the stone, were the same letters. Cove. But now, I noticed something else. 4 symbols beneath them. One looked like the mark on my arm. I traced it. The wind stopped. The sea grew still. And behind me, the sound of bare feet on stone. When I turned around, the cliffs were gone. And I wasn't alone. There was no sound, only the pressure in my ears like diving too deep. I blinked, trying to focus. The cliffs were gone, replaced by something that felt like space, but moved like water. Theo stood in front of me, his face pale, his eyes too still. He didn't speak, but I knew it was him. I could feel the weight of all the words we never said pressing into the silence between us. Behind him was a structurettle, symmetrical, and shifting. It looked like a cathedral carved from fog. Its walls pulsed with faint light, flickering with fragments of memory. I saw my father's handwriting, Emery's laugh, the sound of June singing that tune from the lake. Theo reached for my hand. His skin was warm but felt like paper soaked in rain. He led me toward the entrance. The doors opened inward without touch. The inside was bigger than it should have been, lined with mirrors that weren't really mirrors. Each one showed a place I'd been, some I hadn't. In one, I saw myself asleep on my childhood porch. In another, I was reading aloud beside someone I couldn't name but loved. The reflection moved even when I didn't. That's when I noticed them. The others, not people exactly, more like outlines, flickering like old film, watching. Theo whispered something I didn't catch. I turned, but he was gone again. In his place, a woman stood, not June. Her name was Ren. She had sharp features, softened by time, and her eyes kept shifting color like wet glass. She asked me why I came back. I told her I never left. She nodded, not surprised. Said that the seam doesn't open for those seeking answers, only those who've already asked the wrong question. I told her I was looking for Emery. She frowned. Said I might find her, but not in the shape I remember. She touched the mirror nearest us. It darkened. A corridor unfolded within, lit by faint candlelight. Ren stepped inside, without hesitation. I followed, my breath catching. The air inside was dense and warm, like being inside a living thing. We walked in silence. The candles flickered, though there was no wind. Each wall we passed had mark symbols I recognized from the stone near the cliffs. They pulsed as we passed, like they knew us. Then, we reached a room with no ceiling, just sky, or what looked like sky. The stars were too close, unmoving. Ren stopped and pointed upward. Hanging midair was the same mirror Emery had touched. Only this time, it wasn't a window, it was a door. She told me I'd have one chance. That once I stepped through, time would no longer move the same. That pieces of me might stay behind. She asked if I understood. I didn't, but I said yes. She took the stone from my pocket, pressed it into the base of the frame. The glass shimmered like water about to boil. I stepped forward, felt the air hum against my skin. My name echoed, not once, but twice. Different voices. I saw her, Emery. She looked older, not in years, but in experience. Like time had reshaped her. Her eyes widened, She reached toward me, but between us, something moved. Not human, not shadow. A form built from every mirror I'd pass, taking from every version of me I had forgotten. It didn't block me, it watched, then slowly stepped aside. Emery touched my hand, and suddenly I remembered. Not everything, but enough. The mirror behind us cracked, and the sky above started to fall.